Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone here at the Ukrainian Pavilion for the discussion about food security and climate ambition, how to build a food agriculture system more sustainable due to the war and global crisis. Thank you very much for those who are joining us online and offline today. This is the first time that Ukraine has its pavilion, and we already had lots of events. Many of them were focused on fossil fuels and how this war that Russia has against Ukraine is financed by the fossil fuel exports of Russia around the world. But there is, of course, another story that is very often left untold about the food security, and we see the results of this aggression, but also of many issues that has been accumulating for actually decades and years and decades related to the food security. So today we'll be talking about these issues with our wonderful panel of speakers who are also joining us both offline and online. I would like to briefly mention how we're going to build our discussion today. First, we'll discuss about the issues, and then we'll talk about solutions. Let me introduce first our speakers. We have here with us Maria Diachuk, who is the agriculture expert of Ukraine's environmental NGO EcoAction. We have Chantal Clément, Deputy Director of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. Joining us online, we have Mykola Shlapak, who is the climate and environmental expert and also the expert of the IPCC 6 assessment report. And also joining us online, Mykola Malkov, coordinator of development programs of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in Ukraine. We also have with us here, joining at the pavilion, Ksenia Brandt, who is the climate officer of the German Working Association of Farmers, and Collins Otieno, who is the chairman of the Participatory Ecological Land Use Management Network from Kenya. Thank you very much for joining us again. So we heard a lot how Russia's war in Ukraine has a dramatic impact on food security, but we would like to start the conversation about the impact on food security of Ukraine, and then we'll move to the impacts on the global level and also on climate change. So starting with the impact on Ukraine, I would like to welcome Maria with her presentation on this issue.
Thank you everyone for coming. And first of all, we would like to emphasize how impact of Russian war impact on agri-food system in Ukraine and also agriculture sector in Ukraine. And also everyone knows that the grain corridors is working now, and they are taking an important role in transporting food all over the world. But it is really, there are a lot of risk of these grain corridors, and there are a lot of manipulation from Russia about continuation of these grain corridors. So we have a real risk of this logistical disruptions, and also we understand the problem is completely unsolved now, so we should keeping in mind this problem, and also we should keeping in mind that there are a lot of other problems with Ukraine, with the agriculture system in Ukraine because of the war, because of the consequences of the war. So the next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, okay. So one of the aspects is that after Russian invasion, a lot of territory of Ukraine was mined and contaminated. So after the full-scale invasion of Russians, the amount about of 34% of the land was a zone of risky agriculture. So it was incapable for sowing or producing some food. And also now it's really fortunately that northern and southern part of Ukraine is deliberated, but the mining and contamination of land is still present. So we have another problem. Next slide, please. like mine and contamination, and it's about like 30% of this like now, and it's continuous. And we should like keep in mind also like this question of demining these zones, and also how to restore the zones by, for example, recultivation or conservation. So we should like take in mind that this process is also long term, and it's also expensive. For example, the preliminary calculations said us that the cost of cultivation now for recultivation of contaminated lands is estimated at $39.6 million. And also the question of demining and land clearing, it lasts so long, it can be like 10 years, and it also costs a real big money, like 2 billion euros. So we should keep in mind that this land is not like capable to sowing now, and also there is a lot of military activities there. So we should like focus on this problem, and also that this problem should be resolved in the next years. Next slide, please. Another like second part of the problems is like burning on or destruction of field grains and supplies. It was more actual during the summer period when it was so dry, and because of the military attacks in the southern part of Ukraine, a lot of fields with grain, wheat were really burnt. And for example, in total, like in July 2022, about 30,000 hectares of cereals was burnt, and it was because of military attacks, because it's really like climate crisis we see, and the weather conditions is not predictable. So because of this Russian attacks, a lot of food that can be used or can be like traveled around the world to feed people, it just banned because of Russian attacks. Next slide. Another issue is about destroyed agriculture complexes, because nowadays Russian invasion shows us that big or large-scale agriculture complexes are really military target for it, and it's really vulnerable target for it. For example, first example is it recently has happened to sunflower oil tanks with capacity of 7.5 thousand tons each were damaged, and this sunflower oil was like covered around the city. It was in the city Mykolaiv. And also the second example is Chernobylka poultry farm. It was occupied in the beginning of the war. It was in March, and there was like 4.5 million poultry died in this poultry farm. So it's really big issue and a really environmental issue. So we should keep in mind this, and also should like focus that large, small and medium farms also suffer a big losses, but they are more adapted to it, and they can recover more quickly than big farmers that can be like military attack for Russia. Next slide. So the estimated cost, direct losses of the agriculture sector of Ukraine nowadays is like $6.9 billion. And also I would like to emphasize that one of the part is the stolen food by Russia, because Russia like stole food from the occupied zones, for example, Kherson region and other region, and also they stole another agriculture equipment, also like machinery, seeds, fertilizer. So it's a big, really problem for us, for our agriculture sector. So we should keep in mind this. So to conclude, I would like to say that any supply chain disruptions really lead to aggravation of the hunger and global food security in the world, and Russian invasion of Ukraine and violations of international international agreements, it like present Russia as a terrorist that use food like a weapon today, and it is manipulating around the world with it. So we should like also to keep in mind that when our food system is concentrated in one vertically integrated company on one country, it's lead really to critical situation in the world. So we should like take in mind and resolve it. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine like cause another crisis. So we should see it has shown us that global food system is unstable, is vulnerable. So we should like is an opportunity to change it and to like to make everything in a good direction and yes, build a global food security.
Thank you very much, Maria. You raised many issues which we saw in Ukraine. And I'm pretty much sure that you haven't heard about all of them, because of course globally we discuss about the grain corridor mostly, but indeed we see how Russia is stealing our grains and then reselling it somewhere else, or how they're actually targeting the centralized food complexes. I would just a question, perhaps you know the number of how much grains Ukraine is able to export at the moment in comparison to what is usually the norm in normal years. So what is the percentage?
Russia stolen, for example, according to the research, Russia stolen like 5,030 tons worth of cereals around the world, and really Ukraine like a grain basket for world. And nowadays, like grain and export of grain and food is like 10. Before the war, it was 10% of our GDP. Oh yes, it's really huge, but nowadays it's really like less. Yes, it is really less. So yeah, but grain corridors like help us to like to ship or like to move our food, but it doesn't like sustainable, and we should like decentralize this system.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move now to Chantal, if you could explain to us the effects globally of what's been happening, how the war impacted the food systems globally. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Is it working? Can you hear me okay? Is this better? Yes, great. Thank you. So first, thank you for the event. And it's really great that the Ukrainian Pavilion is hosting such an important event, because alongside climate change, we are facing a food price crisis that we haven't seen in decades. We've reached food prices at an all-time high since, in some cases, 1961, since they've started keeping records for food prices. So this is a very critical issue that we need to be talking about in this space as well. I guess I would say that it's important to highlight that a lot of the things that have been raised by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is not just the high food prices that happened this year, but it was really just it raised the structural fundamental problems that we have with our food systems today. It brought all of those to light. And in the past couple of years, we've had a few instances of shocks that have brought these issues to light. We had COVID 2 years ago, and we thought, okay, we're going to build back, we're going to make a better world. We didn't do so much. And now we have the invasion of Ukraine, and we're finding ourselves in the exact same situation again. So how many crises, how many shocks have to happen before we actually transform our food systems in a meaningful way? So I just wanted to highlight 4 structural problems that I think are very relevant to the invasion of Ukraine and the food price crisis that we're in today, because I think it provides some context of the issues with our food systems and why we're at this moment. I think first, as was already mentioned, is the production of the world's main staple crops are occurring in a very small number of regions and in a very small number of countries. despite the fact that there's very high dependence on those countries and on those commodities from a large number of very vulnerable countries. So of course, when something goes wrong, when access becomes severely limited, those prices will naturally shoot up. So I know that, for example, 26% of countries depend on 26% of countries source over 50% of their wheat imports from the Ukraine and Russia. For some countries like Somalia, like Eritrea, like the DRC, they are using 80 to 100% of their wheat imports on those countries. So these are huge dependencies. Since the invasion of Ukraine, we also saw rising bread prices in Sudan by 50%, in Lebanon by 70%, in Egypt as well. I think the numbers were very high. And again, this is a major problem in a context where in, I think, almost all countries, the lowest income groups, the most vulnerable communities, are already spending over 50%, sometimes 60% of their household budgets to secure food. So if food prices go up even just a little bit, this is a huge impact for those households. So again, that first problem is these huge food import dependencies that we have, not just relying on a small number of countries, but also on a small number of crops and of livestock. So that's my second point, is that we're really entrenched in these industrial food system practices that don't create greater resilience for climate, for conflict, for any kind of shock. Again, because of this over-specialization, not just at the country level, but on crops, we have the whole world depending on maize, on soy, on wheat, on rice. These are very few things if you imagine the global dietary diversity that we could have. And that is one major problem, is that in the past couple decades, we've seen global dietary diversity decrease significantly as a result of this industrial logic of focusing on a very small number of crops. So you have regions that used to depend on millet that are now importing rice. You have regions that used to depend on tubers and other legumes that were useful for their region. Now they're importing livestock or soy or whatever it is. So again, this is highly problematic, especially in a context where often the seeds that we're depending on, these very few livestock breeds we're depending on, are controlled and sold by a very small number of companies in the input sector, in the seed sector, in the livestock sector. So again, kind of tight control of the food system because of this industrial logic. Thirdly, I think, especially in relation to the food price crisis and the invasion of Ukraine, this all exposed that the markets that we're operating in, we're not operating in free liberal markets where prices are the result of consumer demand and supply. We saw that we're relying on these very concentrated, very untransparent markets. Specifically in the case of grain stocks, at the beginning of the crisis, we realized that we don't really have a good overview of the grain stocks that we have in the world right now. And that's because the 4 or 5 big companies who are controlling wheat, trading, et cetera, don't have to disclose those stocks. We also have big countries that have major stocks who are also choosing not to disclose them. So the picture that we have is quite unclear. Speculation was also likely a major driver of the food price hikes. And what's very shocking or frustrating here is that a lot of the speculation happening is from actors that are completely outside the food system. So these are commodity speculators, financiers who are trying to see how to make a quick profit from a crisis rather than making sure that prices are stable so people can have food. And maybe my quick last point is that, again, this conflict is happening now, this invasion is happening now, but it's operating alongside 2 years of COVID, of climate change, of conflict in other parts of the world, and of food insecurity. Because one thing we don't have to forget is that even in 2020, there was, I think it was 800 million people were already facing chronic undernourishment. This number is supposed to raise dramatically in the next year because of COVID plus the invasion of Ukraine. So again, to understand this crisis, we really need to understand these underlying drivers that are making our food system completely unresilient to shocks. So again, as you said, this is an opportunity to start creating sustainable food systems, to start driving a different direction for where we're at now, because where we're at now is not working. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this overview. Wonderful points. And you already mentioned by the end also that climate change is one of those important drivers. We had some discussions here at the Pavilion during these days, and we heard from representatives from Kenya and from other countries already, how they realize all of these interconnections of the world and how they saw prices rising while the drought has been happening right now. Here I would like to welcome Mykola to tell a few words about climate change impacts also on our agriculture systems. So what do you see this year, and especially as the author of IPCC reports, I guess you can share with us some very important insights. Please, Mykola.
Good afternoon. Yes, I would like to stress the attention on why the agriculture is relevant to climate change, because first of all, if you look into the greenhouse gases emission data for Ukraine, you'll see that agriculture and agriculture-related activities contribute significant share to the overall emissions. On average, during the last 5 years, it would be approximately 26% of the total emissions, and this includes both emissions directly reported in the agriculture sector, but also related emissions such as fuel consumption by agricultural machinery, which are reported in other sectors. And the total volume at the maximum level reached 100 million tons in 2019. So that are quite significant numbers. If you look in specific composition, in particular on the livestock sector, the livestock sector contributes a small share to the agricultural emissions, and these emissions are declining because of the declining number of the livestock. Only we have the decline for both swine, cows, and other animals. Only poultry were growing, but poultry contributed only a small fraction to greenhouse gases emissions. But if we will look on the cropland sector, on growing cereals and other crops, here the emissions are growing because of the increase in the use of mineral nitrogen fertilizers, and both in terms of the quantity of fertilizers used per hectare, and also the area of the land where the fertilizers are applied. And also, one other significant source of greenhouse gases emissions related to agriculture is the loss of soil organic carbon. The cropland sector in the LULUCF category of national inventory from 1990 has moved to the source of carbon sequestration, to one of the major sources of greenhouse gases emissions. We can see some fluctuations, but on the maximum level, these emissions reached as high as 50 million tons in 2019. But also, it's important to highlight that agriculture is not only contributes to climate change, but is also a source of solutions to climate problem. In the IPCC 6 assessment report, it was mentioned that agriculture-related activities could provide significant emission reductions that could reach up to 4 billion tons of CO2. And it's important that such emission reductions could be achieved at a relatively low cost, because significant share of this 4 billion could be achieved at the cost of below $100 per ton. But significant share of this 4 billions could be achieved at the cost of below $50 and even $20 per ton of CO2. So that is important to keep in mind. And in terms of Ukraine, there are also significant potential to reduce emissions. Within the technology needs assessment project, 5 priority technologies were selected, including information and communication technologies, conservative tillage, organic farming, and production of biogas from animal manure, and also use of crop residues for energy purposes. And if you look at the potential of these technologies, almost in each case, it could be measured in millions tons of CO2 equivalent per year. So they could contribute significantly to the overall emission reductions for the agriculture sector, but also enable emission reductions in other sectors, such as transport or energy. And also, lastly, I would like to highlight the specific role of nature-based solutions for agriculture. Within the WWF project performed in Ukraine, selected nature-based solutions were described and are planned to be promoted at the policy level and among the agricultural companies and other stakeholders, because nature-based solutions not only allows to mitigate climate change, but also contribute to climate change adaptation and have numerous other benefits for biodiversity conservation, for air protection, and etc. So concluding, I would like to highlight that though agriculture is a significant source of greenhouse gases emissions for Ukraine, it should be considered as a way for solutions to climate crisis, and attention should be given to climate technologies in agriculture at all levels, including during the policy development, but also within the international cooperation and developing new projects using carbon markets and other cooperative approaches available now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you that you already started talking about solutions too. I'm wondering if we have online with us already Mikhailo Malkov. Seems not, so we would move then ahead with our speakers here. So we saw how many issues and problems we are facing, of course. But as Mykola pointed out, that of course we see these issues and problems, but we have to start talking about solutions and how to transform our food systems too. I would like to have this conversation now starting about what we should do, and move ahead to Ksenia. Perhaps you could tell, what is your opinion about how to build an agriculture system in a more sustainable way, regarding the export and import of crops and animal farming products? So what is your point of view on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. And also thank you very much for the invitation and the very interesting input so far. And also I want to express my solidarity with the Ukrainian people. And yeah, it's an honor to be here on the panel. Yeah, and also thank you to the inputs has made. Both IPCC and IPES food reports are very important documents that I use a lot in my work. So it's nice to meet you. I am for a German farmers or peasant farmers organization, and we represent small scale and peasant farmers in Germany. And also we are a member of La Via Campesina, the global farmers movement. So all over the globe, we have more than 200 members of fisher folk, small scale farmers, indigenous people, and so on. Yeah, as we all know, there's a very deep need and urgent need for transforming the food system, as has been mentioned before. And now I can only speak from Germany, which is of course a global north country, and as a land in the global north, we have a very high responsibility for mitigation, the emission, also from the agri-foods sector. Just for a quick overview, when we look at the national emissions from Germany, we have in total like 760 million tons of emissions as Germany, from which are about 66 directly from the agri sector, and of course adding more emissions from the LULUCF sector, fertilizer production, and deforestation and feed imports. When we look at the German Climate Act, these 760 million tons of emission will need to be reduced to 38 million tons in the next 20 years. And last year, the emission were rising. So you see the big task that is in front of us. And it also tackles, of course, the agri sector. We have to reduce emissions about 150%. As I only have 5 minutes, as I was told, I will only look at very key and little points. But of course, I think all of us could talk for this for days. In Germany, and I guess in other countries and regions as well, we have this very fundamental and also emotional discussion on the use of livestock concerning to climate issues, and also, of course, hunger and so on. And as ABL, as our movement, we have just published a paper on the vision and regarding also policy demands on how to have a climate justice with animals, livestock in Germany. I will just mention some key elements that are, for our view, important to change concerning livestock. The main demand mainly is from our allies and from France and in the climate justice movement that there should be a reduction of about 50% of the livestock in Germany. And now, speaking as a farmer, this is a very big task because it means a lot of reduction of the income. So it needs to be accompanied by very good framework so that it does not lead to a loss of the farms. Because actually in Germany, the livestock numbers are already decreasing year by year, but that is not due to a social justice strategic or anything. It's because we lose farms. We calculated that every 2 hours in Germany, a farm that holds livestock is closing forever due to the very bad economic situations of the farmers. So here it is, we have like targets getting really across each other, and we make proposals on how to bring it together. So first of all, maybe very basic, this needs to go together with the change of the consumption patterns as Global North. So we say the consumption has to change into a less and better. But as mentioned before, we have also a big inflation at the moment. So asking from our people to buy higher price food at the moment is not easy to demand because everybody is struggling with the prices. So we say this has also to be accompanied by higher social payments from the state so that people can afford good and healthy food. Otherwise, this demand of just buy better food is not really manageable. Also, in Germany, we have the livestock is not spread all over the area. We have some very high hotspots with a lot of many animals, which leads to lots of nitrate surpluses, which affects, as you all know, water, air, and climate. So we suggest this should be more spread over the country. But this, again, is very difficult because in this economic situations, there are very few farmers who say, oh, yes, I want more. I want to establish a livestock farm, because you need big investments and you don't know if it's going to work out. So there are some important policies going around in Germany at the moment where I don't have the time to explain, but we enforce to make sure that this could be more spread. Also, we say the use of grassland, the dairy milking, it should be more extensive. So agribusiness and also the government has pushed in the last decades into more intensification and intensification, which is always for livestock, for dairy especially, meant a lot of grains and so on. So we say there has to be an extensification and going back to the main use of grasslands, which of course humans cannot eat themselves. But this will mean a reducing of the productivity, and not everybody likes to hear that, to be honest. Also, and now this is what I was also asked to talk about, we have a very high responsibility for the feedstuff that we import as Global North, mainly on soy. And there, I guess I don't need to tell anybody in the panel or in the room about the disastrous implementations of the deforestation. So our suggestion to solve this, or one like little bit that could help to, is that when the EU is importing anything, but let's stick to the example of soy, we need to establish certain criteria that both address ecological but also social aspects to the importing things. And if this criteria is not implemented and fulfilled, the EU must refuse to accept the importments, or either put some taxes on it to establish a fund for making the situation better. This just in very brief, but this could lead to a market, global market, that has more social and ecological fairness. And also we see that agribusiness and intensification fans have always told us that the best climate, like the least emissions for meat or pork or milk or whatever, would be when you have animals as intensive as possible, and that the stable should be closed, and that all the ammonium, let's say for pork, would be taken away by some technical solutions. But we think for so good that now also official new studies show that actually the emissions of pork from the ammonium are lower when you have open stables with fresh air, with a good management, which is also way better for the animal welfare. So we demand to implement this sort of livestock that is good in many ways, and let's not look at one point and make technical solutions. Yeah. I guess my child, but like, yeah, these are some of the key points that I think are important to address. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving ahead with the same question, but of course from another perspective, from Kenyan perspective. Collins, if you could share with us what is in your experience, and of course if you could tell a few words also about the effects that you see now from these crises on Kenya, on the food system, and your thoughts about how to improve it. So what should be the food systems, not only of the future, but of the present, which are more sustainable? Please.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation for us to be here. In Kenya, I think it was a big revelation to us. We didn't know that we were so dependent on Russia and Ukraine for wheat, for fertilizer, for a lot of agricultural inputs that we use in Kenya. So the first, hello. So the first sign that we started seeing were prices shooting up. So the price of bread shot up by from 60 to 80% within 2 months of the war, and it's never gone down to date. The price of fuel, crude oil fuel, petroleum, fossil-based fuel, also shot up. The price of fertilizer shot up by over 100%. We didn't understand about some of these dynamics because in Kenya, we also grow wheat, we grow barley, and we thought that what we were producing was adequate for us as a nation. And when people started protesting, the government started explaining that this was because of the Russian-Ukraine war, and we didn't understand. The other thing that shot up by over 100% was cooking oil that was coming from the two countries again. And we realized that indeed we needed a home-based solution. And based on this, we thought that agroecology as a practice would help us as a vehicle for doing this. This is something that we have been advocating for and we have been campaigning for. As the speakers have highlighted, you find that inequality in terms of food production and distribution, monopoly by big companies in terms of ownership of these food systems actually can put the world at a crisis in the face of climate change. These are things that we really need to think through so that we come up with solutions. It is not fair that 2, 3, 4 companies control the world food production. It is not fair that one company controls the entire seed system. In Kenya, just a month ago, they lifted a ban on genetically modified seeds. And Kenyan peasant farmers who produce most of the food in Kenya depend on local indigenous seeds. And we have an informal seed system. Should this ban go through, then we know that these local seeds are going to be contaminated and that informal seed system is going to be wiped away. Peasant farmers are going to be suffer because they will not afford to pay royalties that go with genetically modified seeds. Their seeds are also being stolen and they are losing them because of this. I mentioned earlier that the fact that we did not value our indigenous knowledge, technical knowledge, and we have been brainwashed that, you know, the external conservation, conventional agriculture is the right way, growing monoculture in large scale. Those are things that have really affected us. And now we are realizing that the way forward is going back to agroecology so that we use local resources locally to produce seeds. We conserve and improve our seed systems in terms of what we can be able to produce our food. We produce for our first consumption, not external markets, so that the food we produce is safe for home consumption first, not producing so that we make more money, but we consume, then it first satisfies the local market, and then the excess is what can be sold outside. So if you look at agroecologies, it addresses issues of efficient use of local resources. It addresses issue of diversity in terms of alternatives. We've had it presented here. We are currently relying on very few foods. Maize in Kenya, we depend on maize rice, and yet we have a lot of other foods that we have traditionally depended on. Sorghum, millet, sweet potato, but these foods are being pushed to the threshold. So we need to go back to this food system, teach our people that they are actually more nutritious, more adaptable to climate change and variability, and therefore promote this. So this is a vehicle that we see if we can be able to encourage, and so that each area, each region is able to produce its own food for the local market, and there is little dependency outside that can be able to complement. So these are the key things that are affecting us. So I'll stop there for the time being. Thank you very much.
Very much. It's, I think it's amazing to have speakers from very different countries and different parts of the earth, but we are all facing the same issues, right? Again, because everything is interconnected. I would like to go back to perhaps Chantal to comment also on the same question, how to how should we make our food systems more sustainable, and especially perhaps we could even say what are the policy tools in place tools in place that would help us to move away from these, few companies actually regulating the market and being in place. So how the the world should react, because we of course have international organizations that are in place, but also governments. How can they improve the situation?
Sure, that's a great question. But when you say the tools that are in place, I think the first thing to clarify is that there's very few tools in place at the moment for the kind of vision that we're all are having. I also wanted to say this is the first time I think I've been on a panel of almost everyone promoting agroecology in a certain way. So I just want to say thank you, because it's quite rare at the COP. That's great. And as you said, coming from so many different backgrounds, and also appreciating that the colleague from the IPCC also pointed out that in the past 2 IPCC reports that were released this year, agroecology, agroforestry were raised as very pertinent solutions to the many crises that we're facing. My answer will, I just wanted to pick up on a few things people said. I think important for us to keep in mind is this idea of producing less. I think when we're at COP, we're always talking about very efficient, higher productivity solutions. Maybe this is something for the energy sector to talk about, but in the context of food and food systems, we know already that right now, even in the current context we're in, we're producing enough food to feed the entire global population. I think, again, I'm speaking maybe to the converted, but we know that the problem is a problem of distribution, of access, of these concentrations of power that exist in various parts of the food system. So again, if we're talking about having to produce a little bit less, this is not going to be what drives a major problem. Before I get to the solutions, I did want to reiterate, I think that for IPES Food, at least, the vision is shared. We believe that a sustainable food system is one based on diversity, on agroecology, and on justice. And of course, agroecology touches on both diversity and justice. I just wanted to share maybe a few things on, and said so well by my colleague from Kenya, but why diversity in the context of agroecology is so key. When we're in situations of shock, resilience to these shocks and resilience over the long term is the most important thing we need. And a system that is diversified on farm, that's diversified within a country or a region, is really what allows us to be resilient. So for example, on farm, if you have multiple crops, multiple species, all in the same space, if one crop fails, for a farmer, for the livelihood of the farmer, you can still rely on all of the other things you planted and all of the other animals that you are producing that year. And of course, because you have that system, there tends to be less crop failure because everything is working in an integrated way. And as was already said, greater diversity at the country level, at the regional level, not only allows us to bring back this dietary diversity that brings nutrition to people, but also allows us to move away from these highly concentrated sectors of seeds, of livestock breeds, where we can bring back local varieties, where we can bring back local breeds that are also themselves resilient to the climate that they're in. That's the point of a locally resilient breed or seed, is that they were made in that environment so they know what to expect. It's completely absurd that we're expecting that the same soy seed, the same maize seed is going to be working perfectly everywhere around the world without the use of a lot of energy, a lot of input, and a lot of work that goes around making those yields so high and those efficient systems so efficient. So I think one thing I wanted to stress perhaps is this capacity, especially in these times of crisis, that countries really need to make plans in a locally adapted way to bolster domestic production capacity in a diversified way. And I think there's many ways that can be done. I think first, if you do rely on staple crops to some extent, which is fine, you need to rebuild a degree of self-sufficiency in staple foods when that's possible. Again, to shift towards more resilient and locally adapted crops, so to diversify that production. And it's worth saying that not all regions will be able to do this the same. If we're looking at the context of Egypt or other Mediterranean countries, desert countries where there's very dry, unsustainable soils, maybe a different solution is needed, but it's the capacity to try to relocalize the system as much as possible, knowing that you're then less dependent on these global commodity chains, knowing that those will always exist to some extent. I think a lot of the case for agroecology was already made, so I won't stress that too much. So let's talk about, how do we get there then? What kind of supports does agroecology need? First thing would be to say is that agroecology is not going to be an overnight process. I've heard very interestingly over the past 2 weeks that no truly sustainable solution is going to be an overnight fix. It's going to take time. I know we don't have that much time, but it's better to think about long-term resilience than to think about a techno fix or the next quick thing that might be able to make us more sustainable. So it is going to be this carefully sequenced steps that we're going to need to take to get to resilience. And I stress that careful sequencing because when we do things too fast, as was the case, for example, in Sri Lanka, where they didn't support farmers, they didn't have the right subsidy structures in place, they didn't have the right plans to shift to organic agriculture, it didn't quite work so well, not because of the practice that they were putting forward, but because of the policies that weren't in place to support that transition. So more support for farmers. And how do we get that support? Two things. Thing is just by redirecting subsidies, and my colleague from Germany mentioned this already. Thank you. Just to say that for agricultural subsidies, every year, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars go into global agricultural subsidies each year. And we all forget that there was a very powerful report that was put out by the FAO, UNEP, and the UNDP last year or 2 years ago that showed that 90% of global subsidies are going to practices that harm the environment and the planet. 90%. That's huge. So, why are we still in the systems that we are today when we have a statistic from the UN agencies that look like that? So redirecting subsidies towards agroecology, towards more sustainable methods, supporting farmers in the transition, that's a basic step. And the last one I'll mention is climate finance. We're in the climate COP, so let's talk about climate finance. A great report by one of our partners recently showed that we know that 30% of greenhouse gas emissions are caused by industrial food systems, but only 3% of climate finance goes to food systems. So of that 3%, you can imagine that even less goes to agroecology. So if it's 30% of emissions, can we maybe have 30% of the financing? This seems like a natural way forward. And also we probably need less than that because agroecology is very cost effective. So if we're supporting the farmers to make that transition, we probably need far less money than a lot of the people are asking for here. And I'll just end by saying a point that was raised by my colleague from Kenya is this idea of knowledge transfer and the importance of local knowledge. It's something that we've completely left behind. We have systems, we have people on the ground, farmers, communities who have the solutions. Agroecology is not a dream, it's happening already. So, what can we do to ensure those knowledge exchanges are happening within the community, within the region, internationally, to allow people to share best practices, to share what's working, what's not working, so we can really develop those solutions, not with the big corporate actors, but with each other in a way that we know is more participatory, more inclusive, and that will get us to sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm wondering if there are any questions at this moment in the audience. If there is no questions yet, I will move forward. And I would like to ask Ukrainian colleagues, how do you think for the reconstruction of Ukraine, as we started discussing a lot about it, and in fact, the pavilion is also a lot about the green reconstruction and the green future. In the agriculture sector, what do you think are the first necessary steps to move toward building a more resilient and sustainable food systems in Ukraine? And especially, I would like to ask one more question, maybe more specific. Maria shared with us the pictures of, and actually you can see here, right, in this pavilion also, how because of the shelling, our very fertile soil is getting contaminated, right? So we will be facing the question if we should have those soils as agriculture soils again and be, growing more and more as usually, or should we transform them somehow? Should some of them become protected areas? And of course, the first interest of the government and of the businesses would be, to grow and to make them agricultural lands. But how do you think the discussion should be around what questions and how to make it possible for these areas to change the the essence of what they are. I don't know if Mikola or Maria would like to start. Maria, perhaps, yeah.
Yes. So first of all, I will start with like national recovery plan. Okay. In National Recovery Plan, we have the sector like no agrarian policy, but most like first draft of this policy of this like project is more like also export oriented and like also not supporting like small farmers. So we like also have like our own principles of green recovery of agriculture system, and also share and pushing with like for governments and also for our deputies. And first of all, it's like supporting of small farmers and build like fair rules in like agriculture market, because we like have now like 2 years open agriculture market, so the physical person can like buy this agriculture land. And nowadays the like for in 2 years the agriculture land can like buy legal person. So there is like a question if like small and medium farmers can like afford to buy this agricultural land, because nowadays in Ukraine we don't have like balance with small farmers and monopoly has a lot of agricultural land and in one hands. And we really like express our like opinions that Ukrainian agriculture sector should have this diversity, and the Ukrainian government should support more small farmers and medium farmers, and also like agroecology. And the second, like first of all, it's about small farmers and supporting them. And the next is involving more environmental practices in it, because nowadays we have a lot of subsidies to farmers to support them, and it is really important, but it is not involved in environmental practice. It does not demand like environmental criteria or standards. So we like pushing also that this is supporting of farmers, small and medium, and also like big farmers should also involve this environmental aspect. So, and we hope that in this Ukrainian National Plan of Recovery will include this part. And also about the second question of restoration of contaminated lands, we in Ukraine have the biggest percent of plowed land. It's like the biggest in Europe, and also one of the biggest in the world. So we like pushing also and think that these contaminated lands should be like thorough monitoring within there, and also part of them it can be capable for agriculture purposes. It should be conserved and also like come back, like return to natural state. So we like think that it is like possible to have this balance, landscape balance within Ukraine. And yes, because this contamination in the land, it also has bigger aspect, not like just environmental, it's also health aspect, because it is migration of populations within like from the beginning of the soil to products that is growing on this soil. So we like pushing and like priority to conserve this land, and also like not at all, but such like part of the land that it is contaminated, it should be like returned to natural state.
Thank you very much. I know if Mikola wants to comment on this too.
Yeah, I would agree with Maria that there is a potential for land conservation because of like significant impact from the war and a large extent of arable land. Probably the focus here could be on the territories which are located like close to the existing natural protected areas or water bodies to like increase the benefits of this land conservation activities, benefits for the environmental biodiversity protection and water quality protection. But also, I think that there will be should be focused on the climate technologies that, apart from emission reductions and adaptation benefits, could lead to like economic benefits in terms of operational efficiency of agricultural producers, because we know that at least some of the climate technologies like tillage practices could result in operational saving due to less lower fuel consumption or other benefits. But also very important is the question of finance, which was mentioned earlier. And here it would be very important to attract international climate finance, because the war has tremendous impact on the public budget, both due to reduced revenues and increased spendings to urgent needs. And there will be limited ability of Ukraine to finance mitigation and adaptation activities. So here I think that Ukrainian soil, for instance, has very significant potential for carbon sequestration, and this should be explored both under their potential Article 6 activities and also using the voluntary carbon market or other approaches.
Thank you very much. And now the question to Ksenia and complaints. We talked a lot about what should be done. So perhaps you could reflect on what is actually done in your. Hello. So perhaps perhaps hello, this works. If you could reflect on what is actually done in your respective countries. So are there any shifts, and as we discussed already today, how many crises do we actually need for change to happen? So do you see this change happening? And perhaps you can give us some bright examples, again, from your respective countries, from Germany, from Kenya, that give you hope and give you this energy to work, because I believe in every country, again, there are these good examples that show the way ahead. So whoever wants to start.
Thank you. I think it is not all gloom, because we, as Pelham Kenya, we are a network of 59 organizations that are spread all over Kenya, and we are promoting agroecology. We started about 5 years back. We are different levels, and farmers are slowly adapting. As it was said, it's not a silver bullet, and it requires work. It requires resources. The farmers need to be convinced. So we have taken the step, and we are educating them, and through adaptive processes. You know, agroecology brings solutions that are context-based. Based on the resources that are available, they identify options that can work. We do trials. We organize adaptive research for the farmers to compare their practices with others in the neighborhoods. We map up for existing adaptive capacities. No community has no adaptive capacity. There are existing adaptive capacities that needs to be mapped, and they are scaled up. They are built on through co-creation, combining science and technology so that they get better. This is what we are calling agroecology. And once you get a number of farmers working together, they learn from each other, they share information, and you find this practice starting to move. What we know has been a challenge is the low support that we are getting from the government. Kenya as a country is a signatory to the Cartagena Protocol that agreed that all signatories allocate minimum 10% of their revenue budgets to agriculture. But what as a country we've been getting is 3%, less than 4%. And this mostly goes to recurrent expenditures. So we are also doing advocacy with the farmers, with the consumers, so that the government actually makes a change in the shifts. And we are seeing trends. Yesterday, I was privileged to have the governor of one of the counties where we work, and we shared with her on the need to embrace agroecology, and she's willing to go and enact an agroecology strategies within a climate change bill that we are enacting. So there is some progress that is already being achieved, and we believe that if we can get this as a movement and we get other examples, the farmers can learn and believe in their own homegrown solution. So there is already work that is being done. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a tricky question because I guess it's easier to say this is needed and this is needed. And yeah, I mean, what is really good is that there was the the declaration on the UNDROP. Maybe you all know it. It's the UN declaration on peasants, farms and rights. So this is something that we can say that is really good. But of course, the implementation worldwide is not in soon sight. Yeah, also we all have mentioned agroecology and that we fight for it, but I think this needs always together just to mention this term is food sovereignty to be added. I could give so many examples for food sovereignty on the local basis, but I just want to pick one. Because also Collins was talking about the threat of GMO. We also in Europe have this because the EU Commission wants to completely deregulate the new genetic engineering, which would be a high risk and threat to our farmers. And I just want to give an example because the GMO lobbyists, they promise climate adapted plants. And they promote that they would be resistant to drought, whatever this means, nobody knows. We are sure that this will not work out, but we as farmers, we have better examples. We know, and I just want to share one example, which is so brilliant, and it's just knowledge-based farmers' knowledge. It is farmers mixing seeds together. So usually when you have, now my English knowledge gets on its borders, but usually when you get to the species of seeds and then even deeper, it has to be very homogeneous to get accepted as seeds. But now the new idea is to make it more heterogeneous and to mix so that when there is, let's say, a drought, there will still be one that can survive. It is the diversity that you were speaking of, and this diversity needs even to get within the seeds of the wheat, for example. The tricky question about is that at the moment it's still very difficult because all the seeds have to be homogeneous to get formally accepted as seeds. But you know, this is what the farmers can offer, and it is so important that this is what is implemented. So far, we have all been very one opinion, so I want this panel to get a bit more controversial, just on one point. And this is the point with the carbon, with the soil as carbon sink that you mentioned. Of course, there's a great potential. And also the farmers, we know that the soil has great potential as carbon sinks. Of course, we know it. We know it. We know the question of the biodiversity of the soil, the fertilism of the soil, it's all connected to the carbon. But where we see a big threat is all these offsetting mechanisms that go together with the carbon in the soil. And I mean, this is discussed here everywhere. I saw great panels being called land as the rescue or game changer or whatever. But as farmers, we are very concerned about this because we have seen other offsetting mechanisms, let it be REDD+ or whatever, which led to so much land grabbing, indigenous people, farmers being pushed away. So about the offsetting, we are very concerned. And again, I can only speak for EU countries, but I can guess you have other examples. which show that there we have to be very careful about. The EU Commission is just about to propose a law that will make the market rules for the carbon offsetting in the soil. And yeah, I can only say that this is something we are not very happy about. And on the other side, you were asking for solutions. Of course, when farmers doing good work for increasing the soil carbon stockage, let it be agroecology measurements like agroforestry or right crop rotations, there need to be funding for it, of course, but there we ask for public funding. In the EU, it's the CAP, the European subsidies, and there is the CAP. People always say, oh no, we don't have enough money for paying you for carbon sequestration, but also the CAP is wasting money. As you were mentioning, the CAP is paying money for owning land. They are paying like big insurance company or anybody who's owning land for having the land. And yeah, this should be transformed in paying real public services that is done by the farmers. Yeah, maybe for so far.
Sure, yeah, please, Sean.
Right, thank you for bringing up the issue of carbon markets. This is my last day at COP, so I feel like I just need to to agree with you. The thing about carbon markets is, as you said, ultimately it comes down to what is the kind of food system that we want. And really I never like to make things black and white, but there's two pathways. One pathway is to try to fix the industrial system we have today, and carbon markets make sense in that pathway, where we want to try to punish the polluters a bit more, to have a little bit more responsibility for those who are doing good work. But that's just tweaking the current system that we have today. It's not fundamentally rethinking the kind of agricultural systems we need. Of course, the most basic issue perhaps with carbon markets is that while someone is doing good work in one place, it's allowing someone to keep polluting to a certain extent in another place. So again, it's better that that exists than nothing at all. I agree with that, but again, only if we're having a much less ambitious and more sort of business as usual view of what food systems can be. If we take the other pathway, we don't need carbon markets, because our standard is higher, the bar is higher, and so we are all doing things that are genuinely more sustainable for food systems, and those things are being rewarded by agricultural subsidies, by supports, and by all of these public structures that would need to be put in place along this other vision, which I think is the one that hopefully most of us share here. Thank you.
Thank you for this. I immediately have a question. If we don't move ahead with trying to fix what we have, but trying to move ahead towards someone's new, how many crises do we need that actually need to finally happen, right? It's still not clear, and it's, I guess, not visible that we actually moving toward that very much being something new in all of the areas. In fact, same with switching from fossil fuels. But that's a question also to us, what's happening. Perhaps there is any questions in the audience to our speakers. If there are no questions, I would like to, sorry, yes, please.
Hi, I'm Nicole Pita, a colleague of Chantal's at IPES Food. And I'm just curious, from those of you that have been at the pavilion here, at the Ukraine pavilion, if you have been approached already with suggestions for agricultural solutions. So if any actors have already been coming to you saying that they have solutions that they can propose, and maybe that is carbon farming or something, because it's well known how fertile the soil is in Ukraine. So I'm just curious if you've been having interactions with people like that at all at this pavilion already.
Thank you for the question. I guess it's a question to everyone who is at the Ukrainian pavilion, not only the speakers here.
I don't know. No? Okay. Yes. We have some interaction, we trying to push this forward, and also this agroecology and best practices in environmental aspects, and trying to push, and also for our government, and also, but it in this pavilion we have some interaction, but it's not so a lot. So we're trying like national level in Ukraine and trying to like to target someone who decision makers who like make some make decisions and planning how to will change agriculture sector. But yes, it's not so successful. Yes, but we are trying to do it. So yeah.
Sorry, to follow up on that, or to ask to clarify, you said that you're talking to some policymakers in Ukraine about steps forward for the Ukraine agricultural sector, and what has been the response when you've mentioned agroecology and agroecological transition?
This is a difficult process, yes, and in Ukraine we have a little bit like agroecology like conversations with like our governments and politics, but we pushing most like nitrate directive in the EU, like directive for Euro integration. It's also like code of agriculture practices. So we like starting from some like small parties of best agro-environmental practices and in our agriculture system. So agroecology, we're trying to like talking about it, but it's like not some we don't have a really developed like direction in Ukraine now, but we were trying to like involve it in it and also planning to like involve in national plan. But yes, we also like it is new for us also because we are trying with EU integration, we become like implement also like some environmental directives and also this environmental criteria in demands. And also, yes, we're like starting to do it, we're pushing, it's not always successful. And for example, nowadays, like National Plan for Recovery, it is like a draft. We also like send our like propositions or recommendations, but it is a process, it's on track now. So we hoping that our recommendations will be involved in it, but yeah, we didn't receive some response, but we are trying to like have some conversation and also meetings with them and like trying to push their agroecology and environmental practicing in it, and hope that in some days it will be involved.
Any more questions from the audience? Yeah. But go ahead. We have a bit of time, so if you want.
Sorry, another one for you, Maria. So a lot of the speakers have mentioned carbon farming and land-based carbon removals. Does your organization have a position on that already? And what is it?
Yes, I will try. Not at all. We don't have like position for it, but now when we like starting to work with conservation process of how to restore this contaminated land, we like have this conservation process, and one of the like changes proposition was like carbon markets, because like farmers want to have like profit, and also someone want to have a profit, and also from the conservation it's something difficult to like have this profit to like locals or local governments and also for farmers. So we like have like these propositions to involve in this conservation process carbon markets. But yeah, it is in the process, so we like trying to make this position on it, and we are like in the progress of working on it. So yeah, but it can be, but in Ukraine also this carbon markets, it just maybe like in conversation, just it doesn't work. So we also have like consider all risks about it, because yes, that someone can like conservation land in some area and another like can pollute it in another area. So it's really a tricky question, but we consider it because it's like we don't have a lot. We should like have investments in Ukraine now, and we could like propose some profit to like to stimulate it, to promote in this conservation process. Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you. Now we are wrapping up. I could wrap up myself, but in fact, I'm so lazy that I will ask our speakers to do this. But I just actually really want them to say a few more words. So our event is called Food Security and Climate Ambition, and we were discussing about how to make our food systems more sustainable and resilient. So if you could really say your final message, perhaps, what is this sustainable food system? What does it mean for you that you're all of you are working on every single day, giving all of your efforts? So what is this sustainable food system that you are trying to advance?
Let me try this. Okay, thank you. Before I get to that question, I'll just say agroecology is a broad approach that is often very difficult to explain. And when we approach policymakers, they are hesitant because of its broad nature, and they would prefer a system that is very systematic and easy to implement. So for an approach that takes long time to see the results and requires so many dimensions, multi-approaches, it's difficult for them. I think Maria was being asked to explain that. It's difficult to explain to the policymakers about agroecology. Of course, you can demonstrate it, and with the time, they get to understand. We, as Pelham Kenya, we've taken even the personnel of the Ministry of Agriculture through courses and taken them to farmers that have started initiating these processes. But we do it in bits, in an approach we call agroecological intensification. So you look at the principles and the elements of agroecology which the farmers have, and you intensify, you announce the results to other farmers so that they can be able to emulate. So to your question, the sustainable food system, it's a system that the farmers do not depend on external inputs. They can generate most of the inputs that they require at the local farm level, and they need little support from outside for them to be able to produce their foods. It is a diversified farm enterprise, which is the enterprises are interrelated and support each other, both at the farm level and at the landscape level. So that ultimately, when we are talking about sustainable food production, it talks about a whole catchment producing food for the people in that particular area. And it is a food system that is able to withstand the hazards and the shocks of climate change. Thank you.
Yes, this is maybe I can add one more thing, but actually I wanted to say it's similar. Well, I thought just, okay, so let's make this as a vision, you know? Let's not look at, okay, this policy and this policy, because yeah, so it's a wrap up. So I think the vision is very similar. I see the food production being regionally rooted. It's based on agroecology and food sovereignty. And also, we didn't talk so much about prices of products the farmers get. So, I mean, in Germany, the farmers of livestock usually don't get the costs they have to grow their products. For example, for a pork, they usually make a loss of 30 euros per animal. So they say we pay entry for working. Also, the organic milk sector is losing money with every liter of milk. So my vision of a future agri-food system is, of course, getting fair prices to the farmers and ending this I don't know the word. When you work too much and don't get money for it. I'm sorry, I don't know the term, but I know farmers who work in Germany for less than €1 per hour. And I guess the situation is similar all over the world. So this must end. We cannot exploit ourselves all day. Yeah, the interdependency is, of course, I totally agree. And of course, the food system must be good for the people, for the environment, for the climate, for the animals. And also it must be fun.
Yes, to both of those. Maybe I want to go back to when I was talking about these two roads. You know, we have the industrial food system road and we have the other road. I didn't give it a name. The name is agroecology. And I think it's interesting. It's true. It is difficult to explain to people because they want a simple solution. But the industrial food system is also a bit difficult to explain if you don't know what it is. It has its own set of values and principles: profit, specialization, mechanization, et cetera, et cetera. Agroecology also has its own set of principles: justice, efficiency, resilience, diversity, et cetera. So this is not so complicated. We can explain it. It's just, it's the fact that agroecology is a completely different mindset. It's a different approach to what we know today. So that's why it's always hard to explain and understand, because we're not thinking in that way as a global community. And maybe just to say, to give one last example, because I want to come back to this issue of knowledge, participation, inclusivity in the food system. Between 2016 and 2019, IPES Food brought together over 300 organizations or more to try to envision and develop what we called a common food policy for Europe. And the idea was that the common agricultural policy that we have today in Europe is not serving us. It's not working in the right direction. And so we were thinking, with farmers, with researchers, with scientists, with people working all across the food system, if we just worked together for a few years and really envisioned what we want and what the policies look like, let's make a roadmap that we could provide to the Commission and say, can you do this? And we know that this was a big part of what led to the EU developing the farm to fork strategy, which I would say is probably one of the most ambitious food and agricultural strategies in the world to try to make food systems more sustainable. Now we need to make sure it happens, but it's a tool. So when you bring people together from a really cross-sectoral representation of people in an inclusive and participatory way, we can come up with the solutions and we can present them in a strong way to our decision makers.
Yes, I also agree with like all the words was like spoken, and also like mention or emphasize on decentralization of the farmers and like diversity of farmers also, because like I said in the beginning of our panel, I said that about Russian invasion, about this like disruption of this like supply chains and everything food system, we really should realize that dependence on one like vertically integrated company or one like country that like export a lot of foods, it doesn't work. It doesn't resilient, and it's really vulnerable because of this conflicts and about other yes, and about other crises. So we should keep in mind that we should like promote diversity and also support small farmers, and these small farmers can involve these agroecology principles and also environmental practices, and they really needed our support and needed support from state and international partners, and it's our like future. And we should like working on it, like working on this direction, and it can let us lead to like sustainable food system.
Thank you. And Mikola, your last bit.
Yeah, my last bit, I would like to emphasize the area where probably everyone can contribute. So IPCC 6 assessment report for the first time included the special chapter and the focus on demand side measures. And with respect to food and agriculture, there are some impressive numbers in terms of like food loss and greenhouse gases emission reductions that are possible to achieve reducing the food loss. So they are estimated in billions tons of CO2 equivalent. So, and to implement these demand side measures, there should be both motivation and the capacity to implement. So motivation, it's like on our side, depends on everyone, but there should be also the capacity to implement demand side measures. So for instance, infrastructure for waste, organic waste composting, of food banks, policies related to this, etc. So I think that is in terms of post-war recovery and economic recovery, it's important that the capacity to implement demand side measures, in particular in food sector, should be ensured.
Thank you. I don't know if it works. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers. I'm also summing up with 4 pillars of sustainable food systems. I'm taking it from you. Diversity, agroecology, justice, and fun. Thank you very much for joining us today. Feel free to discuss with our speakers once the event is over, which is right now. And thank you also for joining us online today. Thank you very much.